Hi there, I'm Stan Baker, one of the hosts of Circle Forum, along with Shelley Steele and Steve Young. We've talked a lot on these podcasts about articles and topics, but today we want to discuss some attendance research that we've been a part of with school districts in Northwestern Ontario. It's called the Attendance Research Project, Attending to Student Absenteeism 2x10. The acronym, for those of you who like acronyms, is ATSA 2x10. The podcast is one of 4 describing the research results and was a pilot project started in January 2023 to June 2023 in 5 school districts in Northwestern Ontario, Canada. And it was our first work piloting the research on attendance. The research was fun and engaging and showed up many things that worked well and that could have been improved. And our first question in the research was the ATSA 2x10 implemented as expected? Well, as you can imagine, implementation meant that we discovered quite a few different things. There needs to be flexibility in timing our work depending on school schedules. Everyone has a role to play in student attendance, so this needs to be part of annual school plans and professional development plans to become embedded in school practice. Check out our website, www.restorative.ca, for more information on absenteeism, on our research project, and on restorative practices. Now, let's get right into the conversation on this part 1 of 4 with Shelley, Steve, and me, Stan. We want to spend a bit of time talking about the implementation of our pilot attendance research project. And when we talk about implementation, not everything worked out exactly the way that we thought. There were a lot of things that were implemented as we intended, but not everything. In the report, it reads, implemented mostly. Let's talk about that.
When I think of the project, there's 2 parts to it. What did we implement, and then what did the participants pick up and carry forward and do? And we know that we were trying to implement it in a certain manner with all the participants, but each group picked it up and ran with it in a different direction.
Yeah, absolutely. There was a lot of, even with us offering different styles of implementation, within those there was adjustments made or not. People who really jumped in and did the work really had lots of great things to say. And then there was the others that really, even with the alterations made and the different ways of implementing it or approaching it, didn't do the work, didn't participate in the discussions. So it became more of a difficult time in the live calls to actually use that time for coaching and problem solving.
Let's talk about the live calls a little bit, because we had intended to have 5 live calls, and each of those was implemented in a slightly different way. One school, because of not being able to get supply coverage, couldn't actually do a small group live call. And this is not a problem that's unique to Northwestern Ontario. So we weren't even able to do live calls. We had to go to a one-on-one coaching model, which was great, but it was different than what we'd intended. And we made that switch on the fly to adapt to the setting.
So I wonder, and maybe we have to go back and look, I wonder if there was a difference in, and did we ask that question, in satisfaction or feeling of gaining knowledge, depending which style they use, the one-on-one coaching versus the group coaching, which even the group coaching varied. Were they all sitting on one computer? Were they in different computers in different locations? Did they have discussions in between as a team? Though those were all variables that changed. And even those that had the one-on-one coaching, did they come back together and have discussions?
We had some groups that we had them on individual computers, right? And that was the easiest for us, but it wasn't always the best for the school. Another had one computer and people sitting around the table, and we couldn't actually see everyone, which also didn't work out, or hear them, right? So the logistics, we really had to work with the technology, because it is long distance, it is online, and so we had to really work at that. It didn't go the way we had expected. So when the report says, was it implemented according to what we wanted to do? Somewhat. We had to make some changes, certainly in the live calls.
With any research project, you want to try and eliminate as many variables that can have an effect on something, and you get it down to 1 or 2 things. And if everybody did everything exactly the way we wanted, then we can say later, look, at the data is valid because everybody did the same thing the same way. So from a statistical point of view, if you've got 5 groups and they're doing everything totally different and they're changing on the fly and we're modifying it on the fly, even if we at the end got some data that proved that things were working, somebody could come in and say, yeah, but your project was all over the map. How can you say your project made that difference in attendance, because everybody's doing it differently? I still think there's some good things that came out of this. If we think of this past year, if we write it up as this just a preliminary test phase as opposed to the actual project, we as researchers learned about how to implement this going forward. And if we were to go forward in a year or two with a different school board, we would propose different models of interaction with the schools. The idea that each school could pick, we want to do it this way, the other school wants to do it that way, and they're both valid, is good too, as opposed to everybody has to do exactly the same thing in the same way. Because what we found is that there's a lot of variables in those schools. Just the motivation, if nothing else, of the participants. We know that some were keen and jumped on board. We know that others were told they had to do it. And when you're told you have to do something and you don't really want to do it, you're going to drag your feet. You're going to find ways for this thing not to work.
And the thing is, we had modules which were information about how to build and maintain relationships with students and with parents. And there were 10 of those. And what we've discovered is that was way too many. So we actually have made a change, and we now only have 5, and we've changed how those modules are set up. And then we asked people to do the 2x10, which is 2 minutes times 10 interactions to build connections with students. And not everyone was able to do that in the way that we had expected. And then the third part was the live calls, where we brought people together. And it's interesting that generally people really enjoyed the live calls. They enjoyed those kinds of interactions. But when it came to the self-reflections and commenting on other people's self-reflections, that's where things really started to fall off. People were not really doing the self-reflection the way that we had intended. There were some fantastic comments for people who, like you said, Steve, for people who really did this. The reflections, the self-reflections were fantastic. We got some great questions coming out of that. Let's take a look at some of the challenges that the participants said were with the implementation. About the format.
A lot of them noted the challenges of just simply finding the time to do this with such a heavy schedule. And some started off, like we jumped in, starting anything in September 1st is the best time, but we didn't start September 1st. A lot of them noted that starting in October and November is just a terrible time to start something. So they noted that challenge. A lot of them noted that challenge. The biggest one was the time factor. Even the people that were keen to do it, struggling to find the time when other things and other priorities were popping up.
Technology. That's a given. It either worked really well as always, or we struggled. And sometimes that was just the setup of the room or the participants. And sometimes it was just them being able to find a quiet space or have the actual technology work to the best of its ability. Which program would we use that would have us interact best as a group? So that was a struggle. And of course, when you're so limited in your face-to-face time, any of that taken away really chips at the opportunity for discussion. Or when it's set up, but people can't interact smoothly, that shuts down interaction and communication as well.
One of the comments that I really appreciated was, listen, this seemed like an add-on for us. And what we really would have appreciated is having this worked into our school improvement plan, having this part of the annual learning plan of the staff so that it was integrated and would actually meet much more of our needs, as opposed to here's the program and here's the school. And sometimes those didn't line up. So being more sensitive to the work beforehand in order to set that up. And I think that this year we're actually doing a better job of that, but we'll talk about that in another podcast. Research is about learning, and it needs to be interesting and be fun to do. We learned a lot. It was interesting, and we had fun doing it. We learned things like the importance of co-creating the application of the research to the needs of the school or district by having conversations beforehand with the school and system leaders. We also learned that just getting current attendance data is challenging and needs attention to get the right reporting to the right people at the right time, not weeks and months later. You can find out more about our research and about restorative practices at www.ca. Our research emphasized that everyone has a role to play in student attendance. What's yours?